Imagine waking up one morning with everything you thought defined your life completely ripped away. Picture a man who spent decades building a career, a family, and a life that most could only dream of, only to see it vanish overnight. This is the story of Dennis Radford, a man who, at 58, went from commanding the operating room to driving a rusted Honda Civic for Uber. 3 years ago, he was the chief of orthopedic surgery at Hartford Medical Center, living in a $4.7 million West Hartford mansion, a life so pristine it could have been plucked from the pages of a luxury lifestyle magazine. His home had 8 bedrooms, a pool house bigger than most people's homes, and a wine cellar worth more than most people's entire retirement funds. He drove a Mercedes S-Class. His wife, Beatrice, adorned in designer clothing, spent her afternoons at the country club playing tennis with the governor's wife. A life of power, prestige, and absolute comfort, and yet none of it mattered. Not a single detail. Because in the world of Dennis Radford, appearances were deceiving, and power had a way of hiding teeth behind a velvet glove. You see, everything began to unravel when Beatrice, his wife, decided she was bored with the life she had chosen and a man who had given her everything. She wanted out. And not just out. She wanted Rodney, her 28-year-old personal trainer, and in that moment, Dennis would learn what it truly meant to be powerless. Judge Cornelius Blackwood, Beatrice's father, was a man who didn't just wield influence. He dominated. Connecticut's judicial system, his handshake more binding than law itself. The same judge who, with a mere nod, could make a man's career vanish and his reputation crumble. And when Beatrice ran off, Judge Blackwood decided Dennis Radford wasn't just going to lose his marriage. No, he was going to lose everything you were useful for, keeping my daughter respectable after her first disaster of a marriage, he said to Dennis outside the courthouse, on the day his medical license was revoked. But she's done with you now. And when a Blackwood is done with someone, they disappear. You'll never practice medicine again. You'll never earn more than minimum wage. I've made sure of that, and he meant it. Every door slammed shut. Every medical application was denied before he could even be considered. His colleagues, once allies, stopped returning calls. The country club membership that once gave him access to a world of influence, revoked. Conduct unbecoming of a member, though no one could ever explain what that meant. The man who had saved knees, mended bones, and brought life back to countless patients was now reduced to a man who begged drunk college students to sit in his back seat without vomiting. Then came the night that changed everything. Last Tuesday, 11 p.m., outside a mansion in Fairfield, an 82-year-old woman stepped into his car. She wore pearls and a black wool coat that probably cost more than he made in 6 months. And then she spoke words that would shatter Dennis Radford's entire world. "You're Margaret Pauline Radford's son, aren't you?" Margaret Pauline Radford, his mother. Dead for 46 years, or so he had been told. The woman in the back seat held a business card with gold-embossed letters. "My name is Constance Drummond. Your mother and I started Pfizer's first real competitor in 1978. She didn't die, Dennis. She's been looking for you your entire life." The steering wheel nearly slipped from his trembling hands as he processed the truth. His mother hadn't just been alive. She'd been building an empire worth $47 million, every penny earmarked for him. But the real shock wasn't the money. It was what she had done with it. She had quietly acquired 15% of Blackwood Industries, his father-in-law's empire. A quiet, calculated act of war, prepared over decades for the exact moment Dennis needed it. Judge Blackwood thought he had erased him, crushed him, left him with nothing. He had no idea that Dennis Radford's mother had been watching, planning, and protecting him from beyond the grave. And now, Dennis had the means, the money, and the power to reclaim his life, to rise from the ashes. Before the fall, Dennis had lived a life others envied. Every morning, he woke at 5:30 a.m., laps in a heated pool, breakfast with a view of manicured gardens, then into his Mercedes S-Class and off to Hartford Medical Center. Chief of orthopedic surgery. Over 3,000 successful surgeries under his belt. Hands steadier than a Swiss watchmaker. Students from Yale lined up to observe his techniques. His hands insured for $2 million. A hospital-mandated policy because of the groundbreaking spinal fusion procedures he pioneered. Recovery time slashed by 60%. Journals published his research. Doctors queued to shake his hands at conferences, calling him the best in New England. And Beatrice, she was perfect on the surface. Beautiful, meticulously maintained, a goddess molded by money and time. Weekly salon appointments, personal trainers, subtle cosmetic enhancements keeping her ageless. She dominated charity boards, orchestrated fundraisers, and everyone agreed. Dennis and Beatrice were the perfect couple. But perfection, Dennis learned, was nothing but a veneer. Because behind the flawless smiles and invitations to the governor's mansion, there was greed, deceit, and betrayal. Beatrice was chasing excitement, lust, the thrill of control, and Dennis was merely a pawn in her grand design. He had met her 15 years ago during his residency. Not a nurse, not another doctor, a pharmaceutical rep with designer heels and a magnetic presence. She carried bottles of wine for educational dinners, dazzled with charm, and relentlessly pursued him. "You're different from the other doctors," she said after their third dinner. "You want more. You want to matter." And she was right. Dennis had always wanted more. Growing up with a father who labored endlessly at a paper mill, a man covered in chemical dust every night, Dennis knew what it meant to struggle. He knew what it meant to fight. His father, Harold, never remarried, never complained. He worked double shifts to fund Dennis's education. "Your mother always dreamed you'd become a doctor," Harold would say, touching the faded photo of Margaret he kept on the mantel. Dennis carried that photo through residency, through 18-hour study sessions, through surgeries where his hands shook with nervous precision. Every knot, every stitch, every carefully measured movement was a tribute to the woman he believed had been gone forever. And yet, all that devotion, all those years of perseverance, were nearly undone by a family whose power was absolute and whose cruelty was personal. Judge Blackwood didn't just want to win. He wanted annihilation. But he had underestimated the legacy of Margaret Pauline Radford, because Margaret wasn't just a mother. She was a strategist, a visionary, a woman who built an empire silently, invisibly, knowing one day her son would need not just the financial means, but the leverage, the power to confront a man like Cornelius Blackwood. Every share purchased, every investment, every calculated move was part of a plan Dennis didn't even know existed. A plan decades in the making, spanning continents and corporate boardrooms, all designed to give him a second chance at life, a shot at justice, a path to reclaiming everything stolen from him. As Dennis gripped the steering wheel that night, his mind raced. The woman in the back seat, Constance Drummond, the keeper of his mother's secrets, had just unlocked a future he never dared imagine. He was no longer just a man ruined by circumstance, no longer a pawn in a game played by the powerful. Now he had the pieces to the board, the means to checkmate the man who had destroyed him. And he would. The streets of Fairfield, once familiar and dull, became a landscape of possibility. Every streetlight, every shadow, every passing car felt charged with potential, like the city itself was holding its breath. He wasn't just driving an Uber. He was driving toward destiny, toward vengeance, toward reclaiming a life that had been stolen but never truly lost. The plot thickens. The stakes rise, and the truth is only beginning to reveal itself. Dennis Radford isn't just a man who lost everything. He's a man whose past, present, and future are intertwined in a web of power, betrayal, and legacy. A man about to turn the tables on the family who believed they could erase him from existence. And in the heart of that storm, one question lingers, unspoken yet deafening. How far would you go when everything you thought you knew was a lie, and the person who loved you the most had been orchestrating your comeback from the shadows all along? Because some plans, some legacies, aren't just about wealth. They're about timing, precision, and the ultimate revelation. The moment when a son discovers that the mother he mourned his entire life has been quietly, relentlessly, and lovingly preparing him for a reckoning that no one saw coming. And as the night deepened, the streets blurred past his Honda Civic. Each mile, each turn, each red light became a heartbeat in a story that was larger than money, larger than revenge, larger than anything Dennis had ever imagined. The night had begun like any other. A lonely drive, a small meal, a paycheck earned in quarters and dollars. Yet, in that back seat, with a woman who held decades of secrets, Dennis Radford had just been handed a map. A map to power. A map to justice. A map to the ultimate confrontation. And as the city lights reflected on the hood of his car, one thing became terrifyingly, beautifully clear. The game had changed. Judge Cornelius Blackwood had no idea what was coming. Beatrice had no idea what she had unleashed. And Dennis Radford, a man who had touched lives with his hands, would now touch destinies with his resolve, his fury, and the legacy of a mother who refused to let him be erased. Some stories start with tragedy. Others start with loss. But the most dangerous, the most electrifying stories are the ones that start with a secret decades in the making, a secret powerful enough to upend empires, shatter illusions, and awaken a son to the truth of who he really is. And Dennis Radford had just discovered his. The ride was over, or so it seemed. But in reality, it was just the beginning. And the next move in this game, this intricate dance of wealth, power, and revenge, would change everything. The pieces were in place. The board was set. And Dennis Radford was ready to play, not as the man who lost, but as the man who had been quietly, meticulously, and impossibly preparing to win. From the moment he took his first breath. Imagine standing in a church, delivering a eulogy to a man who shaped your entire world, a man whose absence has been carved into your life for years, while the woman you married, the person who promised a life together, stays home, conveniently sick, perfectly timed for her next tennis match. This isn't fiction. This is Dennis Radford's reality. A man who went from being a revered surgeon, commanding operating rooms and accolades, to someone whose entire life was systematically erased by the most powerful judge in Connecticut. His father-in-law, Cornelius Blackwood, Dennis's mother, Margaret Pauline Radford, had died when he was 12, or so he thought. She was the woman whose dreams he spent his entire life trying to honor, the woman whose vision had driven him to the pinnacle of medicine. Dennis had married Beatrice, a woman who seemed perfect on the surface, poised, charming, and socially connected, with ties that stretched from country clubs to governor's mansions. Harold, his father, had walked him down the aisle, uncomfortable in a rented tux, overshadowed by the opulence and influence of the Blackwoods. The governor gave a toast. The mayor's wife caught the bouquet. Everything was staged for perfection, but the undercurrents were already forming, hidden in plain sight. That night, Judge Blackwood, the man whose reputation and power dominated Connecticut, leaned over and crushed Dennis's shoulder with a handshake that felt more like a vice. "Your father's a good man," he said, "salt of the earth, but you're moving in different circles now. Think about your image. Maybe limit how often he visits." Looking back, Dennis would see these were the first warning signs, subtle, poisonous, impossible to fight against at the time. Beatrice began the slow, insidious process of pushing Harold out of their lives. First, it was small things. Too busy for Sunday dinners, migraines magically appearing when Harold called. By the time Harold passed away from a heart attack 5 years into Dennis's marriage, they hadn't seen him in 6 months. Dennis delivered the eulogy to a half-empty church, his grief compounded by the absence of the woman who had raised him and the spouse who had chosen convenience over loyalty. Beatrice, meanwhile, was conveniently healed from her stomach bug in time for her tennis match that afternoon. For 10 years, Dennis and Beatrice's marriage ran on autopilot, driven by success, appearances, and societal expectations. He built a thriving medical practice, earning accolades and respect, while she decorated their mansion, orchestrated charity galas, and ensured their lives radiated the right kind of influence. Switzerland, Monaco, lavish vacations, they had it all. Yet beneath the veneer, conversations about anything meaningful were rare. Scheduling conflicts, the occasional polite argument. That was their version of intimacy. Then came Rodney, Beatrice's personal trainer, 28, muscles carved like a Greek statue, charm limited but charisma sufficient for the role he was about to play. She claimed she needed to prepare for her high school reunion. She did more than that. She transformed. She returned home smelling of cologne that wasn't Dennis's, in gym clothes that seemed impossibly clean, hours later than she ever had before. When Dennis confronted her, she laughed. "Oh, Dennis, don't be so middle class about it. Everyone has arrangements. Daddy's had 3 mistresses over the years. Mother knows. She has her pottery instructor. That's how civilized people handle these things." But what Dennis didn't know, what no one could have anticipated, was the hurricane about to strike his life. The divorce, the accusations, the obliteration of his career, reputation, and dignity. When he filed, expecting a fair split, he had no idea the Blackwoods' definition of civilized was a cage with no escape. Judge Cornelius Blackwood wasn't just a father-in-law. He was a storm incarnate, a man whose influence reached into every corner of Connecticut's legal system. And he was about to show Dennis exactly what that meant. It started with the paperwork. On a Tuesday morning, amidst surgeries, Dennis received the divorce papers. He froze. These weren't ordinary papers. They were a weapon. Beatrice accused him of physical abuse, emotional cruelty, and financial misconduct. She claimed he'd been hiding assets offshore, gambling obsessively, even threatening her life. Dennis, who had never played poker, whose hands had healed thousands, who had never raised a hand in anger toward her, read the allegations in disbelief. His lawyer, Martin Frost, initially reassured him. "Don't worry, Dennis. Judges see through these false accusations." But 3 days later, Martin called at 6 a.m., voice shaking. "I can't represent you. My wife is pregnant, and I just got a call suggesting it would be unfortunate if something happened during delivery. I have to withdraw." The dominoes began to fall. 2 more lawyers refused. The 4th explained why, bluntly. "Judge Blackwood owns this state's legal system, Dr. Radford. Any lawyer who takes your case will never practice here again. I have kids in college. I can't afford to be a hero." The assaults weren't limited to lawyers. Anonymous complaints arrived at the medical board, alleging Dennis had been stealing opioids from the hospital. Security footage that would have proven his innocence mysteriously corrupted. A nurse, whom he had never met, testified she had seen him filling fake prescriptions. His surgical resident, the same one who once joked about insuring his hands for $2 million, suddenly recalled him acting erratically during operations. Dennis, who had saved lives with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker, was powerless. Dr. Harrison Polk, the hospital's chief administrator and a friend of 10 years, called Dennis into his office one Thursday. "Dennis, I have to suspend you pending investigation. The board is demanding it." Dennis pleaded. "Harry, you know me. You know this is all lies." But Harry's eyes avoided his. Judge Blackwood golfed with every board member. His nephew was the hospital's largest donor. "My hands are tied," Harry whispered. "Clear your office by 5. The divorce trial was a spectacle of orchestrated ruin. Assigned to Judge Frederick Morton, Blackwood's Yale roommate and golf partner of 30 years, Dennis's case was doomed before it began. His only willing representation, a public defender named Carroll, tried to request a change of venue. Motion denied. Morton ruled without lifting his gaze from the papers. Beatrice took the stand, a picture of composure in a conservative gray dress, tears perfectly timed, sobs narrating horrors that never happened. If dinner was late, he would allegedly throw plates. Threats, rage, cruelty, all staged, all rehearsed. Then came the fabricated evidence. Photographs at Foxwoods Casino, receipts for hundreds of thousands in gambling debts, bank statements showing offshore accounts he never opened. A woman named Destiny testified that he had an affair lasting 2 years, that he had promised to leave his wife, given her jewelry and cars. Dennis had never seen her before. "It doesn't matter," Carroll whispered during a recess. "Look at the jury. They believe her." The ruling was swift, brutal, and total. The mansion went to Beatrice. His practice was liquidated to pay imaginary debts. Retirement accounts seized. His medical license revoked for moral turpitude and professional misconduct. Everything he had built painstakingly was erased. After the trial, Dennis found Judge Blackwood in the parking garage, cigar in hand, flanked by 2 state troopers. "You know, Dennis, I liked you at first," Blackwood said, crushing his shoulder again. "You were useful. Beatrice needed respectability. But she's bored. She wants her trainer boy. What my daughter wants, she gets. You destroyed your own life by thinking you could leave. Nobody leaves the Blackwood family. We do the leaving." He dropped the cigar underfoot, grinding it with an Italian leather shoe. "Your medical degree? Your hands? That middle-class pride? None of it matters. Every hospital knows your name now. Every practice has your photo on a do-not-hire list. I've made some calls. You're finished." Even his tiny studio apartment became a battlefield. Eviction notice taped to the door. 3 days to move out. Dennis called every contact in medicine, every colleague, burning through phone batteries, leaving voicemails that would never be returned. Dr. Peterson, once his protege, answered by mistake. "Dennis, I'm sorry. If Blackwood finds out I took this call, my career is over. Don't call again." It was then Dennis understood the full scope of his erasure. Blackwood hadn't just taken his career or wealth, he had made him radioactive. Anyone who tried to help would suffer. Dennis moved into a pay-by-week motel in East Hartford. Walls so thin he could hear his neighbor's TV and coughing fits every night. And yet, amidst the ruin, one constant remained. His mother's photograph, tucked safely in his wallet, the only thing that could not be taken. And while Dennis stared at it, alone in a stark, dimly lit motel room, one truth became unavoidable. Destruction had its own strange power. The power to awaken something else. A spark, a plan, a possibility, and Dennis Radford, a man whose life had been meticulously dismantled, was only beginning to understand that survival in the face of absolute annihilation could sometimes be the first step toward unimaginable revenge. The night stretched on, silent but heavy. The city outside buzzed with indifferent life while Dennis sat alone, processing the extent of the storm that had been unleashed upon him. And in that quiet, there was a pulse of something darker, something inevitable. A reckoning was coming, and it would not wait. The room smelled like cigarettes and mold. The sheets were stained in ways I didn't want to identify, but it was all I could afford with the few $1,000s I'd hidden in my father's old toolbox. Money Beatrice's lawyers hadn't found, because they didn't think to look in something so working class. For 6 months, I tried everything. Pharmacy technician positions, medical equipment sales, hospital administration, medical billing. Every application ended the same way. They'd Google my name, see the headlines, "Prominent surgeon loses license amid scandal. Doctor accused of gambling and abuse in divorce." And suddenly the position was filled. I tried every variation of my name. Dennis P. Radford, D.P. Radford, just Dennis. Nothing worked. Background checks always caught up. One hiring manager at CVS felt sorry enough to whisper the truth. Someone called our corporate office. They said if we hired you, our pharmacy would fail DEA inspections. I have a family to feed. I'm sorry. Pride is a luxury when you're hungry. After my cash ran out, I swallowed what was left of my dignity and applied to drive for Uber. They didn't care about my medical license or newspaper scandals. They just needed someone with a car and a clean driving record. I still had my mother's old Honda Civic, a 1998 model with 200,000 miles. My father had bought it used when I was in high school. Beatrice had always hated that I kept it. "Why do you hold on to that piece of junk?" she asked once. "Because it reminds me where I came from," I told her. Now it was all I had left, and it was taking me right back to where I started. My first night driving was a disaster. I didn't know the shortcuts, got lost twice, and a drunk passenger vomited in the back seat. The cleaning cost more than I'd made all night. But I kept going. What else was I going to do? Starve? I developed a routine. Drive from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. when rates were highest. Sleep until noon. Eat one meal a day at a Pakistani restaurant where the owner, unaware of who I used to be, gave me extra rice for free. Avoid anywhere I might see someone from my old life. But Hartford isn't that big. One night, I picked up Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a resident who had trained under me 5 years ago. She recognized my voice immediately when I greeted her. "Dr. Radford, Dennis?" she whispered. She remained silent for the 15-minute ride, but left a $100 tip with a note. "I'm sorry. We all know it wasn't true. That $100 bought me groceries for 2 weeks. I wanted to be proud, to refuse pity money, but pride doesn't fill your stomach or pay for gas." For 2 years, this was my life. Pick up strangers, drive them places, collect $300 to $400 a week, pay for motel room, gas, and ramen noodles. Sleep. Repeat. I stopped looking in mirrors. I stopped thinking about the future. I existed, nothing more. Then, on a Tuesday night in November, my phone pinged with a ride request from Fairfield Avenue, the wealthy part of town. My finger hovered over the decline button. The last thing I needed was to pick up someone who might recognize me. Remember Dr. Dennis Radford from the country clubs or charity galas. But it was a $40 fare, 2 days' worth of food. I accepted. The house was a brick mansion with columns, the kind Beatrice would have loved. An elderly woman waited outside, dressed in a black wool coat and pearls that caught the streetlight. She moved deliberately, gracefully, like someone who had never rushed, because the world waited for her. She climbed into the back seat. I greeted her, confirming the destination as the Fairfield train station. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she studied my face in the rearview mirror with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Driver," she finally said, her voice carrying an accent I couldn't place. "Maybe Mid-Atlantic, the kind wealthy people used to cultivate." "What's your name?" "Dennis," I said cautiously. "Just Dennis." She leaned forward. "Dennis Radford." "You're Dennis Radford, aren't you? You're Margaret Pauline Radford's son." Those 8 words hit me like ice water. No one had spoken my mother's full name in decades. My father had always just called her Margaret. Her maiden name, Pauline, barely mentioned. How do you know it?" I stammered. "My mother died when I was 12, I said carefully, gripping the wheel. She laughed, but it wasn't cruel. It was knowing. Sad, even. "Oh, Dennis, your mother is very much alive. I've been looking for you for 3 years. My hands shook so violently I had to pull into the nearest parking lot, a closed Walgreens illuminated by a single flickering streetlight. She remained calm, reaching into her designer handbag and pulling out a leather folder. "My name is Constance Drummond," she said, passing me a business card with gold-embossed letters. "I was your mother's business partner and best friend for 42 years. Dennis, everything you've believed about your life is a lie. She told me that my mother didn't die of cancer in 1979, that my father had shown me a death certificate, a forgery, to cover up the truth. She handed me a photograph. My world tilted. It was my mother, unmistakably her, older now, standing in front of a massive glass building, Drumex Pharmaceuticals. Her silver hair framed a confident smile. CEO Powersuit. The date on the photo, 2018. My mother, a housewife in my memories, was alive. She had been running a pharmaceutical empire while I thought she was dead." Constance pulled out more photos. My mother aging naturally, running a company, shaking hands with senators, ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange. One photo showed her at a medical conference in 2015. A banner read, "Drumex Pharmaceuticals announces breakthrough in cholesterol management." Your mother was never just a housewife, Dennis. She was a biochemist, PhD from MIT. She and I started Drumex Pharmaceuticals in 1978 with a $10,000 loan and 3 patents. By 1979, they had their first $1 million contract. That's when your father snapped. Harold was a good man, but he couldn't handle her success. He couldn't handle her traveling, managing male employees, being recognized in Time magazine as a revolutionary figure in medicine. One night, while Margaret attended a conference in Chicago, Harold packed you up and disappeared. She handed me a newspaper clipping from the Boston Globe. April 1979. Headline, Pharmaceutical executive's son kidnapped by father in custody dispute. Son taken and relocated. My father had changed my last name to Radford, my mother's maiden name. He moved just far enough to avoid detection, worked cash jobs, avoided schools that required extensive verification. Every move calculated. Constance then revealed something even more shocking. In 2005, a private investigator she hired finally tracked me down through my medical school graduation announcement. She had been watching for decades. My mother knew about my marriage, my success, Beatrice, and most importantly, who Judge Cornelius Blackwood was. That's why she started buying shares in his company, slowly, meticulously, anonymously, building 15% ownership over 20 years. Why didn't she just call me? Write to me? Show up? I whispered, overwhelmed. Constance's eyes softened. Because, Dennis, you had a life you'd built. She waited for the right moment. She wanted you to have everything you'd need, to rise, to understand the truth, to reclaim what was stolen. I sat there, the night air cold, my hands still trembling on the wheel, processing the impossible. The woman who had been my mother, my guardian, my unseen protector, had orchestrated an entire lifetime of preparation without me ever knowing. Every hardship I endured, every humiliation, every stolen moment of my life, it had all been part of a plan, and in that moment I understood. Survival wasn't enough. The stage was set, the pieces were in place, and the reckoning that Judge Blackwood would never see coming, was about to begin. The streets of Fairfield were quiet that night, the glow of streetlights reflecting off the hood of the old Honda Civic. I stared at Constance, at the woman who had rebuilt the world I thought was lost, and realized something impossible. Everything I'd believed about my life, my suffering, my mother, it had all been preparation for this exact moment. A new chapter was starting. A chapter that no one could have predicted. A chapter that would not just reclaim what was taken from me, but redefine what power, revenge, and legacy truly meant. And as I gripped the steering wheel, heart pounding, the weight of decades pressing on my shoulders, I knew one thing. Everything was about to change. Forever. The divorce had already begun when the truth landed in my hands like a thunderclap. She pulled out a single, yellowed legal document, the kind that makes your stomach drop and your pulse race. This was no ordinary paper. It was dated just 1 week before she died, a compendium of everything she had gathered over 2 decades. Bribes, tax evasion, case fixing. Every instance of Judge Blackwood's corruption meticulously recorded. Every envelope of cash, every falsified record, every manipulated outcome cataloged and preserved. She had been ready to destroy him, to expose the man who had stolen my life, who had orchestrated my downfall. But the stroke came first, silent and merciless. The woman who had been my guiding light, the one I had believed lost forever, was gone before she could deliver the final blow herself. 3 years ago, Constance said, voice steady but tinged with sorrow. March 15th, the same week your divorce papers were filed. The coincidence should have felt like fate, but in that moment it was something more haunting. My mother, alive for decades, watching, preparing, waiting, and then gone, clutching my medical school graduation photo as if it were a talisman against the cruelty of the world. I hadn't realized I could still cry. I burned my eyes with tears, mourning the mother I never truly knew, alive all those years, just out of reach, like a dream slipping through my fingers. And then came the inheritance. $47 million. Her entire estate. But it wasn't just money. It was something far more potent, a weapon. 15% of Blackwood Industries, quietly acquired, strategically positioned, combined with 3 other aligned shareholders, giving me control of 41% of the company. Enough to remove Blackwood from his own board, enough to tip the scales of justice in a game that had been rigged against me from the start. She handed me another card. Whitman and Associates, her estate lawyers. They had been searching for me for 3 years. But after my name had been dragged through the mud, I had become invisible. No credit cards, no permanent address, No digital footprint. Just like my father had made me when he took me. And now, just like him, I had a weapon crafted in secret, waiting for the right moment. Constance had been waiting too, requesting rides from this area for 2 weeks, making sure the timing was perfect. My life, unknowingly, had been set up for redemption. I looked at the photographs again. A life I never imagined. My mother in power suits, commanding boardrooms, shaking hands with senators, ringing the New York Stock Exchange bell. No remarriage, no other children, just me. Everything she built, every empire, every document, every piece of evidence, it had all been waiting for me to claim it. She had dedicated her life to ensuring that the justice I was denied could one day be delivered. 6 months later, the world shifted. I stood in a federal courthouse in Hartford, but this time the tables had turned. Judge Cornelius Blackwood, the man who had destroyed me, sat at the defense table. His expensive suit could not hide the electronic monitoring bracelet on his ankle. The FBI had arrested him mid-golf game, the country club's fairways now irrelevant as justice closed in. His image made front-page news across Connecticut. The case was devastating. Meticulously documented 23 years of bribes, fraudulent case dismissals, tax evasion through shell companies, and racketeering reaching into every corner of the judicial system. Recordings, bank transfers, videos of Blackwood accepting envelopes of cash in his own study. The FBI director later told me it was the most comprehensive corruption case they had ever prosecuted. The defendant is sentenced to 18 years in federal prison, the judge announced. Blackwood's shoulders sagged under the weight of decades of lies and manipulation finally catching up to him. Beatrice sobbed, but these were real tears now, not the calculated cries from our divorce. Everything she had manipulated, stolen, and controlled was gone. Mansion, cars, jewelry, all gone. The last I heard, she and Rodney were living in a cramped one-bedroom in Bridgeport, her glory days reduced to receptionist work at a dental office. I didn't feel satisfaction when Blackwood was handcuffed. I felt empty, as if I were walking through someone else's mission, completing a task my mother had set in motion long before I could comprehend it. That emptiness lifted, however, the moment I stepped out of the courthouse and saw the real inheritance my mother had left me. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, along with 14 other doctors from Hartford Medical, stood waiting. They had heard everything. "Dennis, we want you back," they said. The hospital board voted unanimously to reinstate me with full privileges and back pay. It was generous, it was right, but my hands had changed. 3 years of gripping a steering wheel 12 hours a day had stolen the precision that once defined me. So I chose a new path. I took a teaching position at Yale Medical School. Professor Dennis Radford. My mother would have liked that. With part of the inheritance, I established the Margaret Pauline Radford Foundation. Scholarships for students from working-class families, those forced to choose between textbooks and meals. Last year, 12 students. This year, 20. The legacy she left wasn't just money. It was empowerment, opportunity, justice in its purest form. I also visited my father's grave at Cedar Hill Cemetery in Hartford. Alone. Constance came with me. "He loved you," she said. Even after everything, my mother never hated Harold. He was terrified of losing me to her success, and his mistakes were born of fear, not malice. She understood that. That understanding, that patience, that long view. Everything she had done was a part of a plan I would only now begin to see in full. In her papers, I found a recording, 15 seconds of my father's voice, proud and broken at once. He had seen what I became. He had reached out, and in that moment I realized that even flawed love could shape a life. I keep it on my phone, sometimes listening while driving. Yes, I still drive Uber 1 night a week. Some call it crazy. I call it grounding. Last week I picked up a young woman in Scrubs, exhausted from a 30-hour shift. "Rough night?" I asked. She hesitated, then admitted she was considering quitting. Her father wanted her to join his real estate business instead of becoming a doctor. I said to her, "I've been a surgeon. I've been broke. I've been destroyed. And I've been rebuilt. The only thing that matters is whether you're living your own life or someone else's version of it. And that is the story of my life. 40 years of preparation, betrayal, destruction, and eventual reclamation. My mother spent decades building an empire I never knew existed. My father kidnapped me because he could not accept her success. My ex-father-in-law destroyed me for defying his rules. And yet, through it all, I survived, rebuilt, and learned the most crucial lesson. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover who you truly are. Did I ever regret becoming a doctor? Never. Not when I lost my license. Not when I slept in motels, exhausted and broken. Being a doctor wasn't just my job. It was my calling. My mother knew it. From a distance, she saw the man I could be and waited patiently while the world tried to destroy me. Now, I teach. I guide. I share my story with students who remind me of myself at 22, hungry and desperate to matter. I tell them about a surgeon with insured hands who lost everything and discovered that justice, power, and love could be patient, strategic, and delivered in the most unexpected ways. The Blackwood family thought power meant controlling others. My mother knew better. Real power is the long game. Real power is love that stretches across decades, crafting an inheritance of truth, justice, and opportunity. Real power is patience, strategy, and the wisdom to act when the time is right. Sometimes justice comes not from the courts, not from vengeance, but from the backseat of an Uber, delivered by an 82-year-old woman in pearls, with business cards and photographs that rewrite everything you thought you knew about yourself. My name is Dennis Radford. My mother was Margaret Pauline Radford, who spent 40 years building an empire while searching for her stolen son. My father, Harold Radford, loved me enough to do the wrong thing for what he thought were the right reasons. I was married to a woman who never loved me, controlled by a man who tried to erase me. Yet, here I stand, teaching, guiding, and remembering that sometimes the most important person in your story is the one you believed was gone forever. Real power isn't domination. Real power isn't fear. Real power is love. Real power is strategy. Real power is patience. And sometimes, real power comes from a mother who refused to live the life expected of her, who built an empire, plotted justice, and left her son with the tools to reclaim not just his life, but the world he was meant to inhabit. Because in the end, what matters is not what you've lost, but what you choose to do with the truth when it finally reaches your hands.